Okay, so I was kind of going crazy in the house today, and I had to get out. And so came out to the woods to have some alone time, because I know a lot of people are struggling with, you know, the isolation and being alone. But as a parent with children, the one thing you really don't have is alone time. So I'm in the woods on an adventure to find some time to like have to myself. And so really right now I'm trying to get as deep into Stanley Park as I can. I know it's not like the woods, but it's all I got. And by bike, it's all I can really get to. So I'm gonna take my bike and try and go into these woods. I kind of have a little path. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I may have gotten myself into a bit of a pickle. See, I've got to get my bike down this ridge to go forward, but I don't know if forward has an exit, and so I'm just going to quickly run ahead and go check this out. Okay, there is an exit, but it is sketchy as all hell, so we might as well try it. So now I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get this thing down the rest of the way. And also we should probably talk about shutter speed, because that's actually what I came here to talk about, was things that annoy me about shutter speed and why what you choose matters. I'm gonna find a different spot though. All right, so your shutter speed. So we've all been in that situation where you need to change your exposure and maybe you don't have a variable ND with you. So what do? What do you choose? And the answer is never your shutter speed. Yes, bring your ISO down as much as possible, but never bring your shutter speed up unless it's what you plan to do. It's important to remember that when you're making decisions, that every decision does matter. Even if it's a run and gun sort of thing, and you're just trying to get things on the fly, everything matters. So this is a common situation where maybe speed is of the essence and you need to go and make decisions fast. But one thing you just can't do is you can't change that shutter speed. And the main reason why comes down to a quote from a guy named Marshall McLuhan, right? Canadian guy. He's a media theorist who coined the term, the medium is the message. That means that everything that you put into crafting your story, where you put it, how you film it, what you put together, what materials you use, that all has meaning and it all has a purpose to it. So every choice you make in crafting your story, putting it together, how you package it, where you put it, is it on YouTube, is it on a theater screen, those all mean something, and that meaning changes depending on who's seeing it and where. So when you're changing your shutter speed, you're changing a big part of your story and a big part of what you mean, and which is fine, but you should really be intentional about it. So one of the reasons I don't like to use shutter speed to change my exposure is that when you see high shutter speed, what you normally think of is cell phone footage, right? It's cheap, automatic video cameras that can't really adjust their aperture on their own, so they default to changing their shutter speed. So if I was doing something where I wanted to replicate that kind of camera, then I would raise my shutter speed. But otherwise, I wouldn't really change my shutter speed for exposure. And the other thing that makes this way more obvious is that you wouldn't go the other way. You wouldn't lower your shutter speed to get more exposure while you're filming things. I mean, maybe you would if it's an intentional thing, if it's You know, maybe you're trying to film a scene, you know, like Wong Kar-wai and Christopher Doyle in, was that In the Mood for Love? I don't know. Anyways, they did a lot of that back in the 90s because that was something that was different then. It got overused after that, to the point now where nobody does it. But that, again, is an intentional decision. But I feel like changing your exposure with your shutter speed is largely an unintentional decision a lot of times. And I've seen lots of YouTubers who claim a lot of things who will often use their shutter speed as an exposure thing instead of their aperture. And I'm here to say that changing your aperture just makes way more sense. And the reason is that it's way less noticeable. When you change your depth of field, people are less likely to notice that than changing your shutter speed. And so let's do some examples. This is a 50th of a second. I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, so 50th of a second is double my frame rate. And that is the general cinematic rule if you're wanting to make things look cinematic. So for this first example, this is 50th of a second. So let's do the unholy thing of cranking it up. So this is 1/25th of a second. Whoa. And you'll notice that it's a lot sharper. There's less motion blur, things are a lot more staccato, but let's go even further. Let's do 2/50th. Okay, so this is 250, and you can see that, you know, there's way less motion blur, there's almost none, and it's starting to look more like, let's say, a phone. And this might be fine in a static image, but when you start panning and looking around and maybe you're following something, and you just start to notice the motion in a way that you didn't before. So right now we're at a 15th of a second, which has way more motion blur and looks like a bad reenactment from Unsolved Mysteries. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go search it and start watching it. You gotta watch the Unsolved Mysteries. The aliens are coming, they're gonna get you. Also home invaders and the Bermuda Triangle. These are all things that we should be worried about, or at least that's what Unsolved Mysteries had me believe. So now let's have a look at the role that aperture plays. Because to me, that's where you should be focusing. And that's where you should be going if you need to change your exposure. Because the differences are a lot less noticeable than if you're changing your shutter. So right now we're at a 2.8. Let's go up one stop to a 4. And so motion blur is the same. Everything's the same. There's a little bit more depth of field, but how much can you actually tell? In fact, let's go up to 5.6. So this is 5.6. The background is still blurry. Let's go up to an 8. Now we're at an f8. And yes, there's more depth of field here, and yes, you can see more of the background, but not a lot. There's still a fair bit of separation. And the visual difference is just not that much bigger than when we were back at 2.8. So this is at f8, and this is at 2.8. Now, the difference between them is not huge. And that's kind of my point. So the main takeaway from this is that if you're going to change your exposure, use your aperture. This visual difference is so much smaller using your aperture to change your exposure than your shutter speed. When you change your shutter speed, you're changing a lot about your story, and you might be doing it unintentionally. All of these pieces are elements of cinematic language. And so what I'm saying by that is that everything you do has meaning to the viewer. So it's important to keep in mind the decisions you make as you're telling your story. Now, to undo all of that, it is absolutely fine to change your shutter speed if it's an intentional thing. There are lots of things you can do with your shutter speed that maybe I'll do in another video that you can use as tools to tell your story differently. So in conclusion, don't use your shutter speed to change your exposure. use shutter speed as a cinematic tool to tell your story. There's lots of things that you can do with it to change the context of your story, change the look and feel and understanding of what's going on. But if you're going to change your exposure, just use your ISO, your aperture, and if you can, use an ND. That is always the best. Always circumstances happen, and I understand, but that is just my rule of thumb. So if this video has been helpful, hit that like button. Let me know what you think about shutter speed or what you do to change exposure. And I don't know, I'll see you in the next video, because there will be some. I'll start making videos again. I guess now I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get this bike out, so let's go do that. Thanks for letting me rant. Anyways, follow me out and I'll talk to you later. I guess it looks like there's just an easy path, like 100 meters away. It feels like I'm in the woods, but like, honestly, I'm just in a city park. There's a highway right there, leads to the Lionsgate Bridge. Anyways, I think let's get out of here. I made it out. Anyways, thanks for following along. We'll see you in the next one. And subscribe if you want to do that sort of thing. Alright, see ya.